people on this planet are moving towards urban areas, and the agriculture system at large is just using more, taking more, and giving less. And so I think really it's just what really strikes a nerve with me is the need to find new ways of doing things. And so the ability to tie really, and this is my perspective coming in to Bowery, was the ability to tie technology into farming.
Welcome to the Vertical Farming Podcast, weekly conversations with fascinating CEOs, founders, and AgTech visionaries. Join us every week as we dive deep into the world of vertical farming with your host, Harry Duran.
If you happen to hear a little background music, it's just something I have on in the background for the holiday spirit. Vertical Farming Podcast Season 2. Happy holidays. Recording this in December 2020. I think we're all looking forward to wrapping up this year and seeing what 2021 has in store for us. If this is your first time listening to the show, thank you for joining me and thank you for listening to these conversations. I'm sure you're in the right place, as this is the show where we interview fascinating CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming companies from around the world. And in case you missed last week's episode, we had a doozy of a conversation with John Purcell. He is the personable and gregarious and engaging CEO of Unfold. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend you check it out. This week, I have the privilege of speaking to Henry Sztul. He's the Chief Science Officer at Bowery Farms. Henry is a physicist, an entrepreneur, and a self-proclaimed tinkerer. With the team at Bowery, he's on an ambitious mission to transform the future of food and change the face of agriculture. In this episode, we discuss the promise that vertical farming provides and why it resonated so soundly with Henry. He shares his personal career journey, his thoughts on the current state of agriculture, and what excites him most about the future of hydroponics. I find out the story of how he met Irving Fain, the founder and CEO of Bowery. We talk a little bit more about the technology that they're using and their commitment to do better. We segue into a chat about Bowery's extensive research and development process and how COVID has affected Bowery's approach to building resilient food systems. Always curious what my guests are thinking about the future of AgTech, so Henry and I touch upon that, and he shares what's exciting him about the future of vertical farming. This episode is brought to you by Ceres, who combines smart greenhouse design with customized climate control technology to build sustainable grow environments for year-round production. They work with their customers and clients every step of the way, from helping to secure funding to providing growing data. Whether you're a commercial entrepreneur, an educator, or someone looking for a rewarding hobby, visit ceresgs.com. That's CERESGS.com to get started on your greenhouse goals. If you enjoyed this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. So let's jump into this conversation with Henry. So Henry Sztul, Chief Science Officer of Bowery Farming, thank you for joining us on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
My pleasure. Very happy to be here and join you, Harry.
So always like to day stamp these. I've seen people talk about today being the first day of the last month in 2020.
It's finally here.
Which gets people pretty excited. Yeah, I think people are just about done with 2020. So just want to get a feel for what the year has been like for you.
The year has been wild. I think that'll be my adjective, wild. You know, obviously a ton going on from every angle, COVID, you know, climate change, politics, everything. At Bowery, we're fortunate to be working on something to impact, to help some of that. It's been invigorating from that point of view to have, you know, work to fall back on.
Do you have early recollections? I think, like, if you think back what you're studying in like grade school and when you went to university, can you point to a trajectory that led you to like where, you know, your current job at Bowery, or was it more of a meandering path?
It's probably a little bit of both. I love that question. It's probably a little bit of both. Like I was always curious about how things worked, how to improve things. And so I had a little bit scientist, a little bit engineer sort of always in me. And one of the things that I looked for after college was this mythical place that I heard of called Silicon Alley in New York.
Oh, yeah.
And I found it, and I got into the startup world and was able to create things and build products and And very fortunately, I stumbled upon indoor farming. It's a great area to combine the science, the engineering, my passion for the life sciences and how the world works. It's a sort of amalgamation, a perfect melting pot of everything coming together.
Did I see correctly that I think it's on LinkedIn profile, one of the words you used was tinkerer?
I am a tinkerer, yeah. Actually, that's how I got into AgTech vertical farming in the first place. I had a early 3D printer, sort of like the first, I'll call cheap 3D printer, and I was sitting at my desk at work printing parts for a hydroponic system, this like modular hydroponic system that I could 3D print myself.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I love to tinker with things. And it was sort of coincidental at that same week, Irving Fain, the CEO and one of the co-founders of Bowery, shot me a note saying, hey, let's grab coffee.
Can you point to an early interest in technology, in gadgets? Is it just like, was it certain shows that brought you in? Was it your parents, or like, where did that passion start?
That's a dangerous question because I'll date myself a little bit. I used to watch Mr. Wizard.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Awesome show. Yeah. Not the black and white version, like, a little bit later. But, between that and some really great teachers along the way, my passion to do just that, to tinker, has always been there. And I'm very fortunate to be able to do it for a career, a profession.
Are there any inventions that you can claim credit for?
Yeah, actually. I worked to develop a new type of twisted optical fiber that when a laser passes through it, a very unique special beam comes out the other side, which has what's called optical angular momentum. And that's actually what my PhD thesis was on. And if you're not careful, we'll go totally into that. So maybe I'll leave it there.
And what's a use case for something like that?
Encoding more information in the same fiber optic cable. Yeah. So more beyond that, but an interesting, exciting time for me.
Yeah, I think I've always been fascinated as people start to understand just how much information is encoded in things like our DNA, and people looking at DNA as a repository, as a storage system for data, just because of the nature of it, and I'm sure that fiber optics operate in the same capacity, but just there's no shortage of information that needs to be stored and retrieved nowadays.
Exactly, and you tie that, you go into the quantum mechanical world, and it opens up a whole other set of interesting possibilities.
Yeah, because I think the quantum, the physics, they start to get into what could be probably termed supernatural, and then objects at a distance, and then observed objects behaving differently. It starts to get pretty crazy. What's your earliest recollection of this, what we would call probably AgTech, indoor farming? You mentioned hydroponics, so it seemed like that was on your radar early on. I mean,
early on being, really the start of my journey at Bowery. Really before Bowery, I was in the tech world. I was, building, video discovery apps on different platforms, and sold that company to Samsung, and was there building next generation smart TVs. And one of the things that I just remember sitting there working on very, very exciting, interesting, cutting edge things, working with, the top media companies in the world, but sitting back and thinking, I need more. And I remember my kids coming to work with me and sitting in front of a big TV. And I was going, wow, they're sitting here seeing me spending all of my time and effort, to build a TV, which can be great, but I wanted something different. I was really looking for, for something to have an impact, more of an impact in people's daily lives. Not just the idea of growing hydroponically, but growing, I actually knew nothing about it. But when I first heard about building warehouse scale indoor farms near urban areas, a light just clicked in my head and said, this makes the most sense that I've ever heard before. And I remember Irving telling me, his plans for building Bowery early on. And I felt like I was finishing his sentences. And it was really just a light bulb experience.
There's something about what you said, this idea of indoor farming, the potential for it to feed a larger group of people and sort of handle the bigger crisis that we're facing in this world in terms of food shortages. Why, and maybe something you need to think about, but why is that important to you? Or why is the thought of that or the promise of that something that was attractive to you?
Yeah, so what really clicked with me is it's not just feeding people now, it's feeding people to come. And so our global population is, set to rise to really just mind-boggling numbers. The people on this planet are moving towards urban areas, and the agriculture system at large is just using more, taking more, and giving less. And so I think really it's just what really strikes a nerve with me is the need to find new ways of doing things. And so the ability to tie really, and this is my perspective coming in to Bowery, was the ability to tie technology into farming, this thousands of year old practice, where people are, to get people produce faster, right? Days, not weeks, to get it more efficiently to people. It has all these added benefits, right? It has the benefits of being more nutritious, the ability to grow without pesticides, right? To be healthier, to taste better, to last longer, and to taste better. I don't know if I said that one already. That's some of it. And actually, it was a little bit of a leap of faith because I'd never seen an indoor farm. I'd never seen a vertical farm. Okay. And I remember this distinct moment in our first warehouse where Irving, I was there with Irving and the other co-founders of the company. And there was just 5 of us in the company at the time. And we were standing in this empty warehouse, and Irving turned to me and goes, can you imagine what we're going to do in this warehouse? And I looked at him, and with this straight face, I said, no, I can't. I can't even imagine it. It's unbelievable.
What's the story of how you guys connected and how you met and how he convinced you to start working together?
Yeah. So actually, Irving and I were in a tech incubator together called Techstars.
Okay.
In 2010, we were in the first class of the New York City Techstars program, and separate companies, but developed a friendship. Our companies that we, continued to grow outside of the program where, our offices were in the same building. And he knew I was at Samsung, sort of writing my time there. And he reached out and we had some coffee and he told me about this crazy idea. And I was hooked. Hooked. And a team of 5 of us, which I think we likened to like Captain Planet or like Voltron. Okay. Right. Like we each had our areas of expertise and came together and worked together in a really like cohesive fashion to build what was then, our first farm that we considered to be a prototype, and really focused on showing that we could build a farm, grow in it, operate it, and sell it out under our own brand. And we were just laser focused and went for those 3 targets. And it was a really good, great experience.
What do you think it says about Irving's vision that he understood the need to build a team with such a wide variety of skill sets?
I think like he and the other co-founders really understood how big of a problem this is and how big of an opportunity. Yeah. And so one of the things I give him a lot of credit for is identifying that technology would play such a big part in solving some of the problems. That was largely my focus at the beginning of Bowery was building what we now today call the Bowery operating system. Okay. And the way I describe the Bowery operating system is software, hardware, and AI tools that we use to operate and learn from our farms. It's really like the central nervous system of the farm and the company. Yeah. And what I really describe what we're doing is scaling the unscalable, right? And you can talk about building a farm, and this is what happened. We built, our prototype farm and learned how to build it and operate it and sell it out, and we figured it out. And when you go and do that at a time 30 times the size, which is what we ended up doing with our next farm, man, the things that you learn from that scaling is intense. And so using technology to be able to solve the problems is what we really focused early on, which I think was really insightful. And so I think did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. I'm wondering how you, coming in with your experience, how you think about tackling a problem this big, especially when there's no roadmap. It's not like you inherited someone's job and they're like, oh, this is what you do on day 1 because this is what the old guy did. Like you have to come in with like that blank slate, and they're trusting you to know enough to come in and support them, but also kind of like, to your point, like scaling the unscalable is also like planning. Can you talk a little bit about the technology that you're using in Bowery Farms? How much is automation versus personnel? Because I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mentioned the Bowery operating system. When I think about, the two main use cases, which is like operating and learning from our farms. Operating could be things like turning lights, fans, or irrigation on or off. And so we've built some proprietary hardware to do that connects with really a first of its kind automation system. And so it all connects together in a way that from that aspect of it, of like how things move around, how you get to crops, keeping track of what lights are on and off, like all of that is automated because, going back to making the unscalable scalable, we realized early on that someone could not, be sitting there keeping track of what needed, what type of light, what recipe of light, how much day versus night, and you think about all the variables that go into growing plants, it's, things like light photo period, intensity, spectra, irrigation. There's just too many variables to keep track of from a people point of view. And so the Bowery OS has automated a lot of that. We still have people in our farms and people play an important part of ensuring the highest quality product ending up, in consumers' hands. And so, like I said, people will always be an important part. And we've thought about what challenges really exist and tried to automate there. And so a great example is, when it comes to, seeding, we've introduced seeding to automation to the seeding process as an example, something that happens many, many, many times a day.
And do you also look into factors such as, I chat with the folks who are working at Bayer, the Unhold, and then just the work that's being done in genomics, and do you operate at that level, or is it mostly other options?
Yeah, so now I'll really, this is where I'll get really passionate. I was talking about operating. There's also the learning side. And so at Bowery, we're very committed to constantly doing better from a yield point of view, a quality point of view, and a sensory point of view. And so what we look to do in our farms is treat every crop as a learning opportunity. A Bowery farm is very much like an assembly line for plants, where every day we plant, harvest, pack, and ship, right? And so in our largest farm in the Baltimore, Maryland area, we have upwards of 100,000 crop cycles a year.
Wow.
Which if you think compared to traditional farm is staggering, right? Part of that is like our definition of what a crop is, but really each crop, each planting of a certain cultivar, of a certain type of crop, we think of and track independently. And so, one way I didn't describe Bowery earlier was as a company where we really focus on delivering protected produce to our consumers. And so part of protected produce is this idea of traceability. And so we actually have traceability of our crops from seed to store. We know everything. We know where they've been, who has interacted with what, where. We know what experience the crop has had during its life. And so we don't grow with one recipe for a butterhead. Okay. In fact, we don't even grow just one butterhead necessarily in a Bowery farm. We're constantly looking to improve. And so through this idea of doing science at scale and treating every crop as a learning opportunity, we're able to slightly tweak and understand the environment's effect on the genetics, right? And I'm sure as part of the conversation you're talking about, this came up in that we have the ability to so tightly control the environment and the ability to pick the genetics, not because of disease resistance, but because of response to photo period or response to temperature, humidity differences in relation to photo period or intensity. And so, it's just the possibilities are endless. And we have learned so much in the past year from this idea of treating every crop as part of a big science experiment.
Do you find that there's challenges in terms of almost having too much data, that, how much of it is actionable and how much of it can be turned around into something that can have a tangible impact on the final product?
Yeah, so there's two tricks, right? The first trick is in this big science experiment, you have to be able to ship all the product, right? Like you can't be growing product and just have to throw it out. So you have to experiment smartly. And then the other part is you can drown in data.
Yeah, of course.
And I would laugh early on, we'd sit, all of us would sit around the table in the company and we'd laugh, jokingly when we would hear other companies say that they have millions of data points. They're collecting millions of data points a day. Well, you know what? We could increase our frequency of data collection and have tens of millions of data points, but that's not where the intelligence is. And so this problem of drowning in data that you're talking about is, again, partially solved with being smart, right? Of what you're collecting and how you're using it. It's also can be solved by having very explicit questions to ask of the data, understanding where your challenges are, and using either, simple decision-making algorithms, more complex machine learning algorithms, or, more complex AI, deep learning techniques to make sense of all the information you have.
And do you find that, I'm wondering, it sort of like presents itself with its own set of new challenges. So does that then start to color how you think about the team that you need to grow in order to sort of work with all these data points and then act upon them?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I would say, as we've grown the team at Bowery, it's been really focused, certainly on the operations side, also very much on the tech, the science and tech side. And as we've grown as a company, I mentioned the number of farms we have. This year, we've grown from being roughly in 100 stores early in the year, in like January, to over 680 stores now. And so you also need the sales and marketing, commercial team to support that, and the people team, right, to help you build the company. And so we've really built a diverse company that, of course, needs to focus on the technology and the operations and the science and the commercial aspect and the finance. There's a lot, I said this early on when we were talking, there's a lot that goes into building, a modern vertical farm. So it's really exciting.
I'm thinking about all the brain power that's going to the operations inside the building, but then there's also, you're speaking about different neighborhoods and locations. So is some of that brain power going to decide where to place the next farms?
For sure. Yeah. I think that's part of it, right? There's lots of different aspects of where's the best place to put a large warehouse scale indoor farm? So you have to think really strategically about how you do that and when you do that. And we certainly, that's where our minds are these days.
Can you talk a little bit about the Bowery's R&D process, the approach? And I understand it's a pretty big focus for the company as well. Yeah.
And so really, I was talking about how we do science at scale. That's really grounded by, how we think about R&D at large. And so at a much smaller scale, we're focused on the environment and the genetics. In our current product offering, we experiment with hundreds and hundreds of different recipes and different cultivars. And the goal is really to find the best combinations, the best combination in this space, this really large space of it's really a big multivariable optimization problem. We also have an arm of research focused on future-looking products. And so, we have investigated things ranging from onions and carrots and watermelon and strawberries and tomatoes to, that's all really exciting, to things like, just crispier lettuce. And so we have a whole branch, focused of research effort focused there.
Is there anything that you've seen with some testing out some of these new types of foods that show some promise in terms of what people might normally not think of or associate with vertical farming?
Yeah, so we are particularly focused right now. Well, let me go back, a couple of months. We recently launched a product that we're really excited about called Crispy Leaf.
Okay.
It's on shelves now. It came from this idea of wanting to sell a crispier lettuce, almost something like an iceberg, but something that has, that's a little bit darker and richer and not like your traditional iceberg.
Yeah.
And so we experimented with lots and lots of different varieties from a number of seed companies. And we ended up landing on a product that we're really, really proud of, really crisp, flavorful product. And we're seeing some real traction in stores now. That's an example of extending a current product line. We've been learning a lot about growing spinach indoors, which is particularly challenging from seed to store. Presents a number of challenges in a vertical farm. And so, we've made tremendous progress there and are looking to bring that to market in the not too distant future. Things get get to be a little bit more exciting and interesting when we talk about strawberries. And so we've been focused on strawberry research and growing out of our R&D farm strawberries for about a year now, and are just really excited about the direction and where we can take, this idea of having terrific tasting, healthy produce all year round in the leafy greens and taking it to something like strawberries where, to get a deep red, truly flavorful strawberry that was grown, nearby where you live, it's impossible in so much of the country.
Yeah. And I think when you think of the other brands, and it's not necessarily, there's not a correlation between the size or even color sometimes of a strawberry. And then when you try to, in terms of how it tastes, and I think that's right. Part of the challenge that people are discovering, that, the more flavorful may not necessarily be the prettiest, and how to reconcile that.
Exactly. And so we're thinking really carefully about and methodically about, where we're devoting our research efforts and, areas like that where we can impact flavor and can provide like a high quality product year round is where we're looking. Yeah, it's really exciting. And I think I think how we think about doing research at Bowery is a real differentiator. The amount of effort and energy focused on not just, creating high yielding product, but like the best tasting product that lasts a long time. That was one of the things actually, to sort of go back to early Bowery times that I really took away. When I took home the first product, I'll never forget it because I went home. I had just moved into a house in the suburbs. I grew up in New York City, lived there my whole life. So I had, for the first time, like an extra refrigerator, right? Like a refrigerator in the basement. And I brought home this big bag. I felt like Santa Claus. I brought home a big bag of lettuce. And every day we took some out. That bag lasted for like a month.
Wow.
Just like same quality. And I was blown away by that, right? And so again, making the unscalable scalable as we, increase production, that becomes a challenge, but we're doing that. And it's a lot of that is driven from our research efforts. We think a lot about not just what we can grow and how we can grow it, but how long does it last, right? What's the quality over time? And what's the consumer experience, a day later, a week later, a month later?
I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about this idea of building resilient food systems in light of everything that's happened with the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that, how, if anything, has changed, the thought process has changed at Bowery pre and post, and then what adjustments have you been making at Bowery?
I think more than anything, we're more committed now than we were a year ago to the benefit that we bring to communities. The fact that we can locate our farms closer to the consumer means we can contribute to stability of regional food supply. And what we can do, which is really exciting and interesting, is offer a flexible and adaptable food source. And so what I mean by that is one of the core concepts in a Bowery farm is that we can adapt and adjust to the grow environment pretty much anywhere in the farm. And so if we can grow butterhead lettuce today, in part of the farm, and next week use that same space for basil or kale, or my favorite, arugula. And that flexibility means we can really adapt over time to what the needs of the communities are. And so you can go back to like E. coli outbreaks, and the response from our retail partners was, what can you give us? Like, what can you give us today? And can you give us more, romaine, in a couple of weeks? And so we can adapt to that. And I think as a company, we're all more focused on the impact that we can have given everything that we've been going through. And so, you asked about resilient food systems. I think at the core, that's what we've been working on and building for over 5 years now.
And do you find that the ability for Bowery to be nimble and responsive, do you see that as a differentiator?
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to flexibility. And so, there are a lot of people out there that do something similar to us. And I think one of the things that we truly differentiate ourselves in is in flexibility and the adaptability of our grow systems. And so, part of that comes back to the Bowery operating system and the technology, right? The fact that we have a decentralized control and sensing system, and we know, that when a crop exists, at a grow space in one of our farms, today it could be butterhead and tomorrow it could be purple bok choy. That's something powerful. And that's something, that we really, have been doubling down on more and more.
How do you think about how Bowery can exist alongside, longstanding family farms, traditional agriculture? How do you see that partnership working and growing in the future?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think some people think it's an all or nothing. It's an all or nothing game.
Yeah.
The fact is that the global population is growing and growing, and the direction that our supply chain is going just can't keep up with the future demand. Yeah. And so I think there'll be a place for all of that. I do think, vertical indoor farming will make up more and more of the produce aisle over time, just because the fact that we can, provide 365 days a year, it's too compelling an argument. Short answer, I think there's a place for everyone to make an impact as we face some of the challenges of the 21st century, but we're here now.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are, growing up with a interest in technology and then now being able to marry that with, the needs that we have for an abundant source of foods and food deserts and the challenges we face getting local food to people that need it. I wonder if you've thought about or what you think about how that affects programs that either exist or need to be put in place at an early level for people to see this, or first for kids to see this as a viable path forward to learn more about, not just traditional farming, but like this mix of what's happening now with vertical farming and opportunities for, new careers in this field.
That's a really interesting question. I haven't really thought much about the answer, but one thing that I do remember and look back to was like going to the supermarket with my parents as a kid. And I remember walking down aisles and being interested in, sure, the, whatever the sugary cereal of the month was, but like the different types of produce. I remember being fascinated. This is going to come off strange, but like different, like way chicken was sitting in the meat aisle and, different types of cuts of beef. Yeah. My grandfather was a butcher, so like maybe to my blood a little bit. But I remember that interest, like an interest always being there. And I think, one of the ways that we can be impactful is really showing a different way of showing up in the produce aisle and telling a part of our story there to spark some interest.
Yeah.
Not every kid walks around, the produce aisle, but I think that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think there are many ways. I think just finding ways to tell people that this exists. The best way is getting our produce in more and more people's hands. And so the type of growth that I talked about, going from 100 stores to more than 680 stores, right? Yeah. Just gets our name out there more. I have this, vision of one of the things that we have in the Bowery OS is pictures and videos of all of our crops growing. And so we have this eye on the crops. And what I'd love to be able to do is to have kids be able to go online, kids or adults, go online and see, a video of their plants growing. And that's just an example of what, some of the things that we can do. And really, I think it's education like that, creating experiences around our food is the real answer.
Yeah, because if you think about, where kids look to for inspiration and, depending what area you grew up, it's the fireman or the astronaut. But I think there's new opportunities. I think when people see what can be done and what options are available, and to your point, just sparking, a child's imagination, I think is usually a great starting point.
Yeah, exactly. I know since I've been at Bowery, like my kids have been more, interested in just growing things in general. And that's through exposure. Right.
Yeah,
and so I think we do have to find more ways to bring that type of exposure into urban areas. And I know there's many people that are working on that problem and doing some interesting things. I know in the New York area, there's community gardens and school programs and greenhouse programs, and the whole industry, that part of the industry is really progressing. I think that's how part of the other way that we can increase exposure over time.
A couple of questions as we wrap up. What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
Tough question. That's maybe the toughest question you've asked me. A tough question I've had to ask myself is, I don't know, maybe like in my, one of my previous lives, previous hats, building, video discovery apps.
Yeah.
I often ask myself, what do people want?
Mm.
You're always thinking about what does the user want? In that world, it's a user, right?
Yeah.
What does the user want? And, I think a tough question beyond at Bowery just delivering clean, fresh produce, once you get past that, just that, you could almost say, but that's a big thing. Once you get past that, what do people want? Do you want a different flavor lettuce? Do you want a sweet arugula? I think those are some really tough questions that, going back to your question about R&D focus, we could devote, the next year developing, a sweet arugula. Do people want that? To me, that's a tough question.
Yeah. That's interesting because it's hard to predict people's tastes. And then when you see like certain foods that become more popular and then to try to dig into the science, and it's probably some of what you were struggling with when you were trying to figure out like what makes a video popular. It's along the same lines because, each human being is going to have its own proclivity for certain flavors, but then there's always going to be like a new food or new product that sort of captures the nation's attention or the world's attention.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, we're fairly lucky, right? People are looking for healthy food, right? And clean food and reliable food. And so while it's a tough question, there's a very strong base to stand on to help guide us.
Is there anything about how you thought about vertical farming in general, or about the way you've tackled certain problems where you thought one way and then changed your mind later about a different approach?
I think that's the sign of a good leader. I think that's the sign of good thinker. I often have found myself, thinking one way about, maybe a particular design or a direction of an experimental design or, some sort of engineering challenge, come back, a day or a week later and said, what, that's something we have to reconsider. I was wrong. I think the ability to say you're wrong is big too. So, at a high level, yeah, for sure.
Is there a previous or current mentor that you've learned a lot from or just comes to mind in terms of someone that's been inspirational for you as you've advanced in your career?
I've had the privilege of working with some really, really interesting people. I think, my PhD advisor was someone that really helped guide the way I think. One of the things that he, really got me to think about was like how you shape problems. And if you approach a problem that you can't solve, how can you change the problem? How can you change the space of the problem to one that you can solve? And so that's something that I've carried with me everywhere I've gone, and even more so here at Bowery is, if you can't solve something exactly as it's laid out, what can you change to make it solvable?
It sort of activates different parts of your brain, it sounds like.
Yeah. It gets you to think about not just thinking about a solution, but you think about the problem, right? And at the time now I think it was a electricity and magnetism exam that I sat down with, and I couldn't answer one thing on the paper. But he said, what could you change? What could you change on this to make, to solve all of them? And so that's a lesson I'll take with me.
I had a friend who used to ask me a question, and I would say, I don't know. And she would say, if you did know, what would you say?
Right. Yeah, that's a similar thing.
And the funny part is I would actually come up with another, take on the question that I initially thought I had no answer for. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So Henry, what as as we wrap up, like what has you excited? I mean, there's so many innovations happening in the space that and Bowery's definitely leading the way. So as you think about what's coming up and the challenges we face in 2021, what are some of the things that have you excited about what's to come?
I think there's really three areas where I get really excited. The first we touched on earlier, which is the genetics side of where we're going, and that there are more and more people in the industry that are recognizing, vertical farming being a big part of the future. Yeah. It's really opening up doors for us in terms of access to more and more genetics. And at Bowery, we're really focused on on testing, getting our hands in testing as much as possible, because both forward-looking in terms of like what these companies are developing, but also looking back into historical, archives, if you will, of what has been developed, has never been tested with the type of control we have. So that's one area that I'm really excited about. A second is just expansion in general at Bowery. We've fully ramped up our third farm, and having done it 3 times, the idea of building more and more farms around the country and eventually beyond is very exciting. And we're sitting on the precipice of something really, really, really great and exciting. So that's number 2. And then number 3, again, going back to what I shared earlier, strawberries are just so exciting to me. I remember as a kid, tasting, strawberries in the summer and just being so excited. And now, the strawberries I have in my fridge today are, okay. They're big, they're okay.
Yeah.
And being able to sit where I am and make an impact, on people's experiences when it comes to strawberries is just so exciting.
No, that's definitely exciting. There's a lot of interesting innovations happening, I think, and a lot of people only see it when it shows up in the aisle, in the produce aisle, and I think they don't understand how much work, how much science, how much innovation, research goes into, getting that new version of the crunchy lettuce on the shelves. And I think that when they hear stories like this, I think it hopefully gives them more of an appreciation for how much brain power is going into, your lettuce.
Yeah, we're really being thoughtful about, what we present to our customers, to our retailers, and to ourselves and our families, right? And so I think you're right. What it takes behind the scenes behind the curtain is pretty interesting.
So obviously Bowery Farming, a best place for folks to learn more about what's happening. Anywhere else you want to point people to so people can learn more about what you guys are working on?
Yeah, certainly boweryfarming.com. You can learn a lot about what we do, where we are, how we do it. And certainly, we have a number of roles that we're hiring for right now and to come. And so you can learn more about all that there. And, we're on, Instagram and Twitter and all social media outlets at Bowery Farming.
Yeah, and you've got a great collection of articles. I think the blog is called The Upside. So I've always been seeing some good
and
stuff.
Recipes. All of that's on our website also now. And recipes and just looking for creative things to do with our produce. Great place to come and check it out.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your story. Tell us, give us a little bit of a sneak peek inside what's happening at Bowery Farms. I know that there's a lot of, front-facing visibility, and you guys are in the news a lot, but it was nice to get an understanding of actually like humanizing what's happening behind the scenes and how much passion and work goes into whatever the team is doing there.
Thanks, Harry. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk today, and looking forward to talking again in the future, hopefully.
Thanks again to this week's guest, Henry Sztul. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, Ceres Greenhouse Solutions. Ceres is creating sustainable growing environments by combining smart design, innovative technology, and dynamic partnerships. Learn more at ceresgs.com. That's CERESGS.com. Don't forget, if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. We'll be sure to read those out on future episodes. Until we connect again, here's to your health.
Thanks for listening. To read the full show notes for this episode, which includes any links mentioned in the episode, as well as a full show transcription, visit verticalfarmingpodcast.com. There, you can sign up for our email list to be notified when new episodes are published.